Last month, India launched its submarine-launched ballistic missile. Now, this launch was extremely important because it completed India's triad, that is, capacity to launch an atomic warhead from land, air, and the sea. The timing of this event was also highly significant because it took place when China was holding its 20th Party Congress. Obviously, in the launch of the SLBM, the messaging was there very clearly for China as well. Meanwhile, Russia, India, and Iran held their first conference, or the Troika conference, on Afghanistan. Obviously, with this event, India became a frontline state in diplomacy on resolving the Afghan crisis. These two events seem to have slipped under the radar, and that would be the focus this week. On October 14th this year, India launched the submarine-launched ballistic missile. Now, SLBM is a very prized technology which India has possessed for some time. But this particular weapon completes a very important dimension, which is completing the Indian nuclear triad, which essentially means that India now has a capability to launch nuclear weapons from the land, from the air, and now from the sea. So in other words, India's nuclear deterrent has deepened manifold with the launch of the submarine-launched ballistic missile, or SLBM. It's not the first time that India has launched SLBM. Earlier, we had already launched what is called the K-15, which is a 750-kilometer range SLBM. But in this case, it looks a little different. While the government is tight-lipped on the kind of missile which was launched, but it appears that this was the 3,500-kilometer range K-4 missile. Essentially, it acquires even more relevance because it was done not by the developers but by the users, which means that the Indian Navy was the one which actually went and launched this missile. Now, the range 3,500 kilometers is very important. The reason that if you take the submarine closer to China, then this missile would cover almost the entire China, but definitely the coastline, which would mean the industrial heartland of China, which is Guangzhou and the region around that. It will be able to target Shanghai, the commercial capital of China. And if you take it even closer, you could go ahead and target Beijing, China's capital. So therefore, the launch of this missile was a message to China, and that is why it becomes very, very important. Why to China and why on October 14th? Now, there's a reason for that as well. The messaging to China goes because at that particular time, the Chinese 20th Party Congress was in progress. What is the 20th Party Congress? This is a once-in-5-year event which the Chinese hold, where they come out with a blueprint of major strategic direction which the country will take for the next 5 years. So while the Chinese, during the time when the launch took place, were talking about their aspirations of being the world's biggest economy by 2035, or being a leading country across the globe by 2049, well, India was also sending them a message that you may have your aspirations, you may have your bigger goals, but don't mess with us. And that we have a nuclear deterrent which is strong, which is powerful, and when it comes to India's core interests, then we have acquired certain capabilities. So please do not cross the red line of India's core interests. It is very important here to talk about what is Arihant all about. Now, Arihant is what is called a SSBN, which means submarine for SS, B for ballistic, N for nuclear, which means that this is an underwater platform powered by a nuclear engine which can launch ballistic missiles, which means ballistic missiles which also have a nuclear warhead. So essentially, this becomes a very, very important platform for India's what is called the second strike capabilities. That is the capacity to absorb the first strike by a hostile force and, if required, to launch a second strike. The reason why the second strike capability is acquired is because the Arihant is a nuclear submarine. It can go down underwater and can go undetected for very long periods of time. As a result, it's very hard to destroy this missile. Now compare this what is called a diesel electric submarine or a conventional submarine. Now the conventional submarine has to go underwater, but there is a time when it has to come and refuel. And when it surfaces for refueling, it can be a sitting duck because it can be picked by various kind of surveillance equipment which is available, which may be satellites or which may be aerial platform. And that's a time when a diesel electric submarine becomes very vulnerable. But the Arihant kind of submarines, which is nuclear submarines, they are very hard to detect. And therefore, once you have nuclear weapons boarded on it, their survivability rate goes manifold higher than it would be had the case been a conventional submarine. And that's why this particular platform has become very important. There are a number of other nuclear submarines which will come into India's arsenal as the years progress. Now the SSBN is very different from what is called a SSN. SS for submarine, N for nuclear, but it means that a SSN is powered by a nuclear engine. So it has the endurance to stay underwater. But unlike the SSBN, it does not carry missiles with nuclear warheads. So in the sense that the attack capacity of a SSN is conventional and not nuclear. And that is why it is different. So SSBN, India in the course, in the years to come, is going to have a bouquet of SSBNs and SSNs along with conventional submarines, which would be the formidable underwater platforms with the country. As a combination, it will have the capacity of deterring not only neighborhood, which is Pakistan and China, but in the years to come, possibly beyond the region. The second major event which slipped under the radar was the formation of the Troika on Afghanistan. Now, what is the Troika on Afghanistan? This is a dedicated group of 3 countries which will focus entirely on analyzing the current state of Afghanistan and would ideate with each other to give a direction or to resolve the problems which are emerging in Afghanistan, which are plentiful. The 3 countries are Russia, Iran, India. Now, why is it important for India is that India had been marginalized from the diplomacy on Afghanistan in the past. There was another Troika which was there in existence earlier, and the countries composing that Troika were Russia, China, and the United States. There was also a provision for an extended Troika, which included Pakistan as well. So the star cast was entirely different. Now this Troika was formed on the sidelines of the Moscow format, which is an existing grouping of Russia, Central Asian countries, India, Pakistan, etc. It's a much larger grouping, which was held last week. But it was on these sidelines that this particular Troika was formed. With that, India has come to the front line of international diplomacy on Afghanistan. And because it is Afghanistan and because it is on the front line, India has also entered, in a way, a capacity to influence the larger Eurasian theatre. It is important here to understand why India suddenly has become a part of this Troika. Now, the roots of that really go on India's strategic autonomy and India's independent foreign policy. Because of pursuing this kind of an approach, India did not take a hostile position against Russia when the Ukraine-Russia conflict broke out. So it's in a way linked to the hostilities between Ukrainians and the Russians. Because India took an independent position and did not join the overall campaign by the West, led by the United States, against Russia, it naturally, in a way, improved the ties between Moscow and New Delhi, and as a result, the Russians were more than happy at a time when they were being isolated by the West to accommodate India as part of the fresh diplomacy which is taking place on Afghanistan. So in a way, it is a reward for India's independent foreign policy, for its strategic autonomy, that India today has become a part of the Troika. And this is just the beginning, because as things go and as a multipolar world emerges, the greater will be the scope for India to influence events not only in Afghanistan but by and large in Eurasia.